Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Welcome back, everyone. I am thrilled for today's conversation. We have Julie Bindeman, PsyD psychologist, joining us. She is an expert on reproductive health, and we're going to talk about how that shows up with grief. Julie, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
So much for having me. I am so excited for this conversation.
Just to kick us off, do you mind sharing a bit about yourself, your background, and what you do?
Sure. I am a reproductive psychologist. This is a field I've been practicing in now for 16 years, which seems incredible to me. And I do a lot of writing, and I speak, and I see patients, and do a lot of third-party work within the reproductive technology piece of reproductive psychology. And I really love it. I feel like it is a niche that found me versus me finding it.
Oh, interesting. That is a great segue to the next, specializing in reproductive psychology. Do you mind sharing a bit about your journey to specializing in that? Because that is so niche.
Yeah, sure. Many of us in this field are in there, as I like to say, honestly, because of our own reproductive journeys that we've had. So I am within that cohort. And although if I look back at my journey, I'm like, oh, there were other signs before I even started down family building. So I had worked in a high school during my grad school time, and one of the people I was working with was a high school senior who was pregnant. So, okay, little pop in there in terms of what was that like, and the school was great with her. And then fast forward a little bit, while I was getting my postdoctoral hours so I could get licensed, I was working at an all-girls Catholic high school where one of my seniors got pregnant. That was handled very differently from the other school I was at. Yeah. And so again, like another little piece that was there. And I then left to work in a group practice where it seemed like we made the joke that pregnancy must be in the water because there was like 4 of us that were pregnant at the same time. Oh, and then later on, I realized that several of them had really difficult journeys to get there. So it wasn't quite as, oh, how funny. It was like, no, this was very intentional.
Yeah.
We were really lucky. We got pregnant and I had my kid, and everything was very boring and textbooks as it should be. And so I went into trying to have a second kid with a template that didn't actually serve me. Yeah. I knew about miscarriage. I knew about loss, right? Had of experience those kinds of situations. And it wasn't until I had my own miscarriage that I realized how woefully unsupportive I had been in the past. And I think a lot of it is just we don't know what to say. My framework from growing up is just very feminist, very pro-choice. And so in my mind, it's just the sack of salt, not a big deal. And of course, once you've been pregnant, no matter how long you're pregnant for, just for sack of cells, it's a dream. It is a wish. It is a hope. It is a potential realization. It is something concrete of the love between two people. So it's anything but, which is a really different shift in framework. So miscarriage is common, happens 25% of all pregnancies that at least are known pregnancy. And so everyone, just try again. Don't worry about it. This happened. And so that's what we did. And our journey was then characterized by 2 consecutive second trimester were both terminations for medical reasons due to brain disease. So now we became weird because one does not have 2 of those losses in succession, and there was no genetic cause for it. So IVF was not really a recourse for us. It was more of a, all right, this looks like a recessive gene combination. We can't identify the gene, so get pregnant again, and there's a 25% chance it'll happen again in any pregnancy. And it's cool. Okay. That is what we did. And we were blessed to have 2 more healthy living children. That is the quick version of my story. And just all of these experiences really continued to direct me into, okay, this is what I need to do. And I, over the journey, have started it. I had become very knowledgeable about postpartum issues after I had my first. I did not experience postpartum, but I was like, oh, I could have. I had risk factors for it. I very well think about it. So it became a field that was very interesting to me, and it's much more broad than just postpartum.
Absolutely. So within that broadness, do you mind speaking to that broadness and the different ways that reproductive psychology shows up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I look at my job in, I help people decide whether they want to be parent. I help them when they have difficulty becoming parent. I help them when their pregnancies do not go as planned or they do not come to the end of what the desired outcome is. And I help them with any difficulty during birth or thereafter. So it really is that reproductive spectrum. And I'm starting to get more training in menopause because that's a whole other part of it too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So you've really centralized that reproductive health as your primary focus in clinical work and research too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's amazing. So what would you say then, because this is a grief podcast, so what would you say are different ways grief can show up along that broad journey that you were just describing?
Oh, grief is everywhere within this journey. So I'll start with the place where it's like the least obvious, which are when people experience some kind of postpartum issue. And the grief that exists there, which of course is not something that other people can provide comfort, but it is grief and guilt that my postpartum time wasn't as I wanted it to be or imagined that it was supposed, whatever that means. And there's a lot of guilt and for the grief around that I might not have been as connected to my baby as I would have imagined I would be. So all of her future children. And I think again, I would say that's only obvious because we're talking about healthy babies. We're not talking about any kind of adverse outcome. Although I would say that postpartum is an adverse outcome, but we're not talking about any kind of loss of the it is for loss of the expectation, the loss of the imagined. And I would say that also connects to people who've experienced birth trauma, to that sense about loss of control, that grief over the birth not being anything that they would have hoped or wanted, the fear that it might have caused. And if I'm building it on the least obvious kinds of grief to the most obvious, I would then talk about when people need to turn to assisted reproductive technology. And it's the loss of being able to conceive on one's own. It is the introduction of other professionals, treatments, all sorts of things that get introduced that when you conceive on your own, you have to think about. Yeah. So there's that piece of grief. There's the grief of cycles not working. And there are so many different points in which a cycle might not work. There's the grief about the financial cost of it and what that means to a couple. There's the grief of all my friends are having babies and I feel left out and I can't take part of it and it hurts for me. So again, it's the grief too of we did a transfer and it didn't work. Or we did a transfer and I miscarried. All of those things yield in grief. And then I would say the most obvious part where it really connects to grief in the way that most people think about grief, where is when people experience or neonatal or in part of the work in full so in a different kind of way, being able to hold space, but also being able to help people heal from the inevitable trauma that the loss are on to inflict on a person. So I appreciate being able to be for a time where people tend not to expect crisis. They're young, they're starting out, they're excited, and they don't expect that this is going or for them.
And we had chatted a little beforehand about this can be perceived as a disenfranchised type of loss. Like you even said at the very beginning, it's the little bag of cells. And then I had my own experience, and it's so much more than that. It's not just that. And yet in society today, we struggle having language and allowing that type of grief to take up space, which can deepen that isolation and the grief about community connection support when we're grieving.
Yeah. I think because it being what I like to think of as a perspective loss versus a perspective loss. So it's the loss of a possible or perspective feature rather than a shared, well, we lose a family member or a friend. It's a retrospective loss because people can gather and like, oh, remember the time when?
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about pregnancy loss. We don't have those memories. Nope. Or the ones we might have are so intimate and not necessarily ones. So that makes it hard as a loss. It oftentimes too, people have the loss and they hadn't even shared that they were pregnant. So it's, by the way, we were pregnant and we lost the baby. And like that being in terms of the way people have to share what was going to be really exciting, or so excited and they didn't share pregnant, only to a couple weeks later have to, what I like to call it, I call it the untelling, where people have to then call everyone in bearing. And that, right? And you get the initial, oh, I'm so sorry, and these things happen, but you're young, you'll have, you get platitudes.
Yes, the minimizing. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Because yes, these are common losses, statistically at least.
Yeah.
When you are that one in whatever the statistic is, they are really hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that they don't feel common when you are the one.
Yeah. I think that's such a helpful phrase, prospective losses. I'd use the phrase secondary losses or the ripples. That's the missed out future opportunities, or the, like you had mentioned earlier, when you were at the place of employment, it seemed like it was in the water. And so everyone was pregnant. Well, thinking about friend groups that have the common pregnancy thread, and then you're watching their kids grow up and you're missing out on that as they're hitting those milestones. And
Yeah.
so it's those griefs that continue to come and land far after the initial shoot loss.
Yeah. I remember being on play dates from the play group I made from my first kid. And not only like were people having their second kid, but I remember the one group I was in where someone was actually pregnant with their third. And I was like, there. I was like, I just want children. And I can't even do that.
Yeah.
I was so angry, and it's her fault. No, I was just so angry. It felt so unfair. That's another piece that's really hard, is that these are losses that can't be controlled. So we can't eat the healthy foods that prevent miscarriage because that's not a thing. Just like we can't really eat the healthy foods that enable us to become pregnant. Right. Pineapple's not going to do it for you. But so I think that lack of control, that's so hard. And that most people are really used to when something doesn't go the way they plan or expect. There's a roadmap to get back on track. And with this, with loss, with fertility challenges, there's no roadmap because it's not something that we can necessarily influence.
And it could be so many different things, and it's so much we don't see. And there's no quote unquote quick fix, or I'm going to use this essential oil, or I'm going to, like you said, I'm going to eat the right foods. I'm going to make sure I take the right vitamins. And we try all of these things, and there's still no guarantee.
Yeah. And again, what's so different is we are taught, at least as Americans, and I use this example all the time with my clients, like, well, we're in school and we get a bad grade. A roadmap for passing the class or getting a better grade is, okay, let's look at what study techniques you have. And maybe we need to reevaluate those, and maybe we need to have a tutor or whatever it might look like. Maybe we actually have to do the reading, do the worksheet class. All of these different things can help us with the outcome. Sure. And again, it's clear. We know what to do. We can put that all there. We can't do what we're talking about reproductive.
Yes. Oh, that's such a good comparison. I just keep thinking of the roadmap. Okay, I'm actually going to follow the syllabus. I'm going to use the planner. I'm going to find a body double to do the study dates with. And it's so different with reproductive health. It looks different. It's a different landscape. It's a different school entirely.
And it's like a school where you don't know what classes you're teaching. I think they just shift every time you show up.
They shift monthly. So we tried this or we tried that. And it's a constant moving zone of, I don't know which class I'm going to be in, what teacher I'm going to have, what lunch I'm going to get, what combination of things. And then just hope that, I hope I get the passing grade.
Absolutely. Like at this point, I'll take C. I don't need BI.
Oh, that's so true. So with these complicated losses, with even just the monthly cycle loss, what would you say are some self-care or support strategies that we can implement to help us with coping, with navigating, with being in that waiting space?
I think my support strategies are different depending upon who is risking. What I tend to tell people that are going through assistive reproductive technology and using technology, it is so easy for that to become your second job, to have just to be laser focused on it, to have the blinders, and to feel like that is all you can do outside of your mind. And before my clients start treatment, we talk about what are the things you enjoy, what do you like to do with your free time, and we talk about how do you keep those things up. Because interestingly enough, those are the first things to go when people are trying to carve out time to become the ART expert. And those are the things that they need. This is the time when people need those things the most. So we really talk and try to figure out, like, how do you not allow this to be a second job? How do you allow yourself to trust your doctor? Because all the research that you might do and that one study that shows something that is really novel might not actually be a thing. And coming to your doctor with, if you actually read through it, but done on 5 people, and we have actually no way of seeing what actually happened in this.
So the N isn't high enough to give us any significance. And
yeah, right. And we get the cut where some people are like, oh, I'm this, and we have it. It's okay, let's slow your roll here. With my clients, when I have a kind of thing loss, we talk about, and depending upon who they are, some clients are like, and boring people I don't. I'm like, hey, if that's what feels okay to you, and that is a way you are carrying your baby, then you're content. If it is not something that feels okay for you to talk about, but don't, and that's okay too. I think a lot of times people feel like they have to be this advocate all of a sudden when they've experienced some kind of reproductive loss. And that's not the case. That's a choice. And for some people, that advocacy feels really good. And for other people, that advocacy is just too challenging and too hard. And both are correct.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about what does meaning making look like for you. And it's going to look different for each person, for each loss. And like you said, for some people, advocacy feels great. And for others, it's, I need to just be a burrito on the couch. Like that's all I have capacity for. And I'll think about maybe something I can do in a meaningful way in the future, but I just I'm hurting right now and that's not a direction I can move that feels supportive or safe for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't, yeah, I remember saying to a client who lost her son when he was 6 weeks old, and they knew that he needed to have a surgery. They knew that was going to be coming up the right after her birth. He did. It was a surgery that's pretty common. And he was in that small percentage that didn't have the expected outcome. And so they used what was important to her partner was going on the walk, raising money for the foundation that had been built for this kind of condition. And so she had done that for a couple of years. And we were talking about how she just read it. And I said to her, that's what's important to your partner. But it doesn't have to be important to you. Just because it's important to your partner doesn't mean that you have to think about it in the same way. Maybe you don't go. And maybe that's okay.
I love that. That's just such a beautiful demonstration of how different people within a couple can grieve the same loss so differently. And the meaning making, the whether you're showing up as more of an internal griever or an external griever, and that both are equally valid. And it's okay if you need to grieve a different way than your partner. That doesn't mean you loved your person, your baby, or who you lost more or less. It's going to look different for you because you're different. You're different people.
And oftentimes the non-caring partner doesn't feel like they have time and space to grieve because they didn't experience pregnancy and they need to help the carrying partner manage the emotions that most commonly she might have. And so there doesn't feel like there's room for them to also have loss. I've heard so many people say, I would love to be sad about it, but if I'm sad and my life is sad, then we're just going to fall into the pit of despair. We're not going to be able to commit. So I need to be okay so that when she's I can help. I can go into the pit of despair and then she's going to refix me.
And what do you tell clients in that moment?
I think about it, and that's so interesting that you're thinking about the pit of despair as these really individual experiences rather than looking at it as what might be like, almost like I imagine them sitting in the pit with their backs against one another. And if they can't use their hands and they have to stand up, then you use your back, right? To be that support and slowly both of you stand up.
And so that's interesting hearing that the partner felt like she couldn't be down there. She had to stay up. So you could throw her a rope out versus like, why can't you both be there together and support each other in coming up versus feeling like you have to be stuck there?
Yeah. And it's always interesting to me, and I'm sure you see this with your clients too, the idea of if I ever touch that feeling of sadness, I can't linger there too long because it will then take me back to that grief or depression I've been in. And I'm like, no, that's not how it works. But I get it. Yeah.
And grief is painful, right? We don't like experiencing pain. So we'll lean away from it rather than leaning into it and moving through it. And I think it's so often grief doesn't go away. It just looks different over time. And we experience grief bursts based on different stimuli that happens. And it can be something overt that we're aware of or covert that I'm grabbing a yogurt in the grocery store and suddenly like I'm thinking about my loss and I have to leave the store. And that could have been that's the loss. So I think it's so interesting that at least within a couple that's going through a reproductive based loss, that feeling of having to do it separately versus together, because why can't we both be sad and that gets to be okay? Why isn't there permission for that?
And sometimes too, some partners feel just like others minimize the loss. Some people have internalized that minimization of it. So it's you know what, it was a miscarriage. Let's just try again.
Yeah.
Which is and that's not wrong or bad, right? Like I look at that and I'm sitting there saying, oh, wow, here's someone that has hope. Yeah. That will try again. There's a hopefulness to it. Yeah. And means that maybe partners can't be in that place of hope at the same time, that maybe they both get there.
Yeah,
But that one is have to wait.
sure. And it's that both and, right?
Yeah. It's not an either or at all.
So in speaking about partners or even our support people and minimizing language, what would you say would be some helpful things to remember when someone shares that they've experienced a miscarriage or are struggling with conceiving or going just in that cycle? What would be helpful validating language?
I like to talk to people. So I also work with people who support those that have experienced or are experiencing new technologies. And we talk about rather than saying, what can I do for you? Which puts a lot of burden on that grieving person. Is like, I'm bringing you dinner tonight. Or I'm taking your 2-year-old to school. Or coming up with these very proactive things. And the other person could say, actually, I have that covered. Okay. But it's a different experience having someone do that mental load work for you than someone you just tell me what you need. And I don't know what I need. How do I tell you what I need when I don't even? I think another way of being there for someone is just showing up and listening. Hey, I'm coming over and we can talk about it or we can talk about everything, but I'll let that be your decision and I'm here for either.
Yes. Yes. I was chatting with someone else and I think a couple episodes ago, and something that was really helpful for them when they were going through their loss was like, I knew I was going to go see a friend and I needed to be able to tell them that I was not okay and that I might want to talk about it, but I also might not want to talk about it. And I need you to be okay with both because I don't know how I'm going to show up. So I think how you articulated that as a friend, text them like, hey, I'm coming over, I'm bringing coffees, and I'm just going to hang out with you. Like, we can talk about it or we can not talk about it. You can change your mind at any point. Just because you're committing to something ahead of time doesn't mean you can't change your mind later and decide, oh, wait, actually, I don't want to talk about it. Or, oh, actually, I do. Like,
Absolutely.
And figuring out who are those safe people that can be in that tension with us.
Yeah. And I think that if we're talking about a pregnancy loss and a person has named that baby, first of all, I would use the language that the person who experienced the loss used.
Absolutely.
So if they're calling their loss, I lost the fetus, okay, I'm going to adopt that language. Most of the time, people will consider it a baby. And I want to recognize too that politically that can be real. We live in a climate where that can be really loaded and have different kinds of political meaning in it. So I use whatever language is the language that the person in front of me is using. And if the person named their baby, then I use the baby's name. If you thinking about, oh, what are you feeling today about Tommy? What's that like for you today in this moment?
Yes.
Rather than being, again, sharing away from it. Our suggestion I give people, particularly family, is to set a reminder in your calendar that comes off once a year that speaks to the anniversary of the loss. Because that is a date that is solidified in a person's fiber and being. And it can be so lonely to have that date and not have anyone who's faithful with it.
Absolutely.
To be alone in that, which again is why it's different than that communal kind of loss, that retrospective loss, where people can be like, oh yeah, I know this is, or coming up upon the time when your mom died and here's how I'm thinking of her.
Yes. So helpful. So great. So as we start to just wrap up our conversation, what would be 2 or 3 important takeaways just to understand that relationship between grief and reproductive psychology?
Grief is inherent in reproduction. And again, it's not something that we think of because we think of reproduction as life affirming, which it is. And that cycle of life, that circle of life might be way more truncated than we expect it to be. It is losses that are out of order, if you will, right? Like the losses that aren't supposed to happen because you're supposed to lose people only when they're old. versus losing them other than when they don't meet that criteria.
Sure.
Particularly for someone that you have been dreaming about that might not have been fully embodied, that you might not have had any time with beyond that sort of under construction kind of time. That's still very much a loss. And there's a disenfranchisement in these kinds of losses, particularly in the losses that people have even less language for. So I think about losses terminating for medical reasons. I think about ectopic pregnancies, these kinds of things where there had to be medical intervention, and that medical intervention was proactively thought out, because that just complicates things so much more. And I know that, so I guess what I would leave people with is all kinds of pregnancy losses are valid losses. That there's no such thing as like a better loss or a harder loss. That 39-week stillbirth is not necessarily worse than that 7-week miscarriage. It's different, but we don't have to have a grief Olympics around this. So I think that not trying to build or minimize, I'll come back to that word, not trying to minimize a person's loss by saying, it's not as if you knew the baby. It's not as if this. It's not as if that. Do you know not what of what you're saying?
Yes. Oh, so want to do a quick chance for you to shout out because you just had
Sure.
a book come out, which is amazing. I'd love for you to share a bit about what your book is about and how people can access it.
I wish I could sit here and be like, my book is a great work of fiction or like New York Times bestselling. No, my book is a book.
Great.
So in that, unless you're a nerd like me, you're not necessarily so excited about pet books, although there are some that I know are coming out that I'm so super excited about. So mine is called The Mental Health Clinician Handbook for Abortion Care. And you can get it. It's published by Springer. So that's also very excited. I edited the book because I recognize there are people that know a lot more than I do. And it is a book that if you have a client that has experienced an abortion at some point in their life or is experiencing it and this is not your area of expertise, this is a book that can help bring you up to speed.
That's amazing. What a time for a resource.
Like I hate that we have to have this resource, but also I was very ecstatic to be the one that could birth it, you know.
Yeah, excellent word choice there. Is there anything that we haven't covered today that you were hoping to be able to speak to?
I think that this was a great kind of general conversation. And so I really appreciated just being able to make an overview of what this is like for people. And it's a kind of loss that so many people can feel and tends to be minimized. I keep coming back to that word. And yet it can be such an impactful loss. So really being able to show up and recognize that this loss is just as valid, potentially just as painful as any other kind of loss that a person might experience.
Julie, thank you so much for being on the podcast. This has been, like you said, a really great overview, and I think such an important conversation to start. And I will definitely be reaching out for probably a follow-up interview because I know you just have such a wealth of knowledge and experience and support to give in this area. So for our listeners, is there a way for them to get in touch if they're interested in working with you or getting more of your resources? What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
The website, our website is greaterwashingtontherapy.com. And that's where you can learn me and my team. And certainly feel free to reach out through that.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put all of those links in the show notes. And then are you on social medias at all?
Yes. I'm on Instagram, Dr. Julie Bindeman. I'm on Twitter because I refuse to call it Dr. Julie B. I'm on Facebook, Julie Bindeman PsyD, LinkedIn. It's all the usual.
All right, listeners, thank you for joining us for today's conversation, and we'll see you next time. Remember to be kind to yourselves today. That's all for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If today's conversation resonated with you, I invite you to share it with someone who might need it. And if you're looking for more support or resources, feel free to head over to The Morning Movement, where we continue to build community and normalize these hard, beautiful parts of life. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and until next time, be kind to yourself. Opening and closing music is provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, collaboration, or training opportunities, feel free to email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. And podcasts are also now available streaming on YouTube.